Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy, and today I am thrilled to be joined by Fritzi Horstman from the Compassion Prison Project. Thank you so much for joining me, Fritzi.
Thank you, Jane. I'm so happy to be here.
So the topic of this series is on how to talk policy and influence people. And I'm going to be talking to you about prison policy and practice on trauma. But before we get into that, Fritzi, can you tell me a bit about yourself, please, and your background? How did you get into this fascinating area of work?
Well, I used to be a film producer. I produced The Defiant Ones, which won a Grammy.
Wow.
Which is on HBO with Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine. And I guess the first part that got me into it was realizing that I was traumatized. When I read a book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score.
Amazing book.
Amazing book. And it was like a flashing light bulb went off in my head. It's like, oh, I'm not this violent person, this road rage. Like, where does that come from? Where does my weird reactions to my son's spontaneous joy, I freak out when he's like banging on the table. It's like, what's that from? And I found out that's from trauma. And one of the things about childhood trauma, it's from my childhood, is a child is on edge their entire, when you're on edge like that, you don't know what's coming at you. So the chemicals of cortisol and other chemicals go through your body. And so you stay in it's hypervigilance. It's a state of high awareness, but that's damaging to your whole system, to your spirit, to your body, and to your brain. So when I learned that my childhood trauma not only was affecting my behavior, but it was affecting my health, I was like, why doesn't anybody know about this?
Yeah.
And so one of the things in my life, I've been very, very concerned about the way America has treated the African Americans. And so I started after I won the Grammy, I started developing projects. And then I got an invitation to visit a prison, and I walked into a prison. I walked in, first of all, everything all my fears about, who I was going to meet melted in a second. And I just realized, we all had to introduce ourselves. And I said, hi, I'm Fritzi. And I'm realizing this isn't a prison, this is a trauma center.
Yeah. And
we just got it wrong. That's all. We thought people were bad. And what I've come to know, and I can prove, not only are we not bad, we're just traumatized. And it's not just people in prison. Mm-hmm. And so, it was a program called Hustle 2.0 that I walked into. And I was like, I am in, let's do this. Let's bring love and compassion, or whatever her program was, let's go. And so I said, when are we coming back? And she said, in 6 months. And I was like, that's in March. That's not okay. And so I decided to create a program called the Compassion Prison Project. I got a nonprofit status. I researched kindness and compassion, and I created a little booklet curriculum, and I sent it to one of the men I met who works at CDCR, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. He says, let's do a pilot program. So January 5th, 2019, I walked into Kern Valley State Prison. It's a maximum security prison. And I was presented with 25 men. The first thing I said to them is, I love you.
Wow.
And then the second thing I said to them is, I've been traumatized as a child. And I went through some of the things that I had endured. And I would say within 10 minutes, we were all on the same page. And, I spent 4 hours there that day. It was a strange day. And then I came back the next 3 weeks later, and half the men that I had talked to were gone, and a whole new slew had arrived. That's not a good attrition rate, but, so I rebooted again, and, all the pitfalls and everything. And then, a year later, I had responses from the men who said, you know, this was the best class I've ever had. And, you know, we work on forgiveness, childhood trauma, self-compassion, intention, like watching your thoughts, mindfulness. We do meditation every class. And a thing called the Giving Back Project, where we give back. You know, a harm has been committed. We need to repair that harm in any way we're allowed to. So how do we build bridges back to our community? How do we build bridges back to ourselves? And also, we also do principles of restorative justice. So that's kind of our Compassion Prison Project in a nutshell.
It really is quite remarkable. And it was in April on Twitter that I saw your amazing promo clip, the Step Inside the Circle movie. And I was so unbelievably moved, as were many of the people that I kind of follow from trauma circles, or those who follow the adverse childhood experiences science, or, you know, just kindness and compassion generally. We were all sharing it and saying, wow. But one of the things that struck me most was the man in his 70s, the African-American man who said, I don't normally speak, I don't like speaking much, but this has been one of the best days of my life. And I was going, that is the saddest, awfulest thing. And yet it's profoundly beautiful, because you and the group of men, and actually I wasn't obviously in the room, but I kind of felt a calm. Everyone looked quite calm. And that's not a word that I would use for American prisons. Not that I've been in one, but they're dangerous places. But Fritzi, do you think men like that man, and all the other men really have been failed, gravely failed, not just say by their families, but by the wider community, by the education system, by racist policies and inequity?
In short, yes, we've absolutely failed. But, you know, first off, let's just say we've also failed ourselves. We haven't. This is our community. These are all the men and women that we failed. And that's Howard. His name is Howard, just to put a name on that beautiful man.
Yeah.
And the minute I met him, my heart was just like, what is this young man doing here?
Yeah.
What is he doing here? What are we doing? And how did he not, make parole? We're about to come up with another film that's about the symptoms of trauma, so we can start really breaking down to the public what happens when the body, brain, and spirit is traumatized. And there's another man, Sam Brown. He was the man that was in the center with me. There's photos of him all around. He wasn't really in that first PSA, but he's going to be big. He's big time in the next one. And when you see him talk, he actually addresses Vince Folletti and Robert Anda and Governor Newsom and Nadine Burke-Harris. He knows all about childhood trauma. He knows about, what happens to the genomes, the epigenetics. He's just, when I talked to him, I was like, who are you? And then again, why is he in prison? What are we doing? What weird maze, and how do we have to prove a person is suitable for parole? I mean, what convoluted society are we doing this to? Both of these men deserve to walk around free, because especially with Sam, who has educated himself beyond, any PhD master. We need his brain, we need his experience, and we need his, his understanding about what it is to be a criminal, but also what it is to be a human, and a human in these circumstances. And, my vision is that in 3 years, all prisons become wellness centers. That's it.
Yes.
We are shifting this paradigm now. I can feel it. Just having these talks, this is spreading awareness. And, to all your listeners, please make sure you take an ACE test so you understand what those 10 adverse childhood experiences are. So maybe you've just had one, which that in itself could be very, very traumatizing. That can shift the trajectory of your life, you know, into adverse health conditions, but also adverse emotional, social emotional manifestations. And so there's you know, there's a call now that we all start understanding what trauma does to our bodies and I mean, we're talking about comorbidity in the COVID crisis. That's all trauma. I'm
Yes,
like, why does
thank
anybody
you.
know this? Why isn't anybody putting this together? You know,
Yeah, the underlying conditions like asthma, cancer, cardiac issues, all trauma related.
lung disease, you know, heart attacks, all of it. You know, it goes on. The list goes on and on. Fibromyalgia,
Yeah.
just like and when we trace it back, when we start saying, oh yeah, I've had, you know, and also longevity, 6 or more ACEs. Both of my parents, my mother died at 69, my dad died at 61. That's 20 years off both of their lives, and probably 30 years off my father's life. My father smoked 2 to 3 packs a day. I mean, same with my mother. They just needed relief
Yes.
from the
The
anxiety.
dysregulation and the cortisol that was ever present.
Exactly. I mean, and we shame smokers, you know, and this is a society of shame. If we don't like something, we just shame it instead of like, oh, wait, this person is medicating themselves. You know, I don't like having smoke in my life because I grew up with 2 smokers, but I don't want to shame anybody for taking care of themselves. And that's, you know, that's a reframe. Suddenly, you know, okay, I don't like to smoke, but I understand you really need to, that's compassion. And, you know, that's what's available to all of us, is like reframing how we look at everybody and what they're doing. You know, people who act out sexually are shamed. You know, Louis C.K., one of the funniest guys in our society, is now, you know, got a scarlet letter on his chest, you know, for acting out. I'm sure there's trauma riddled in his life. I mean, it wouldn't be so funny. You know, and if you want to talk about Ireland,
Yes.
you want to talk about Ireland? Let's take it the famine. Let's go right to the famine. Now that is trauma. That is that global consciousness in Ireland. That's that, and you know, the wars between the North and the South. I mean,
For sure.
This is some serious trauma.
Collective
Trauma, absolutely. And United States, we've got slavery. We haven't absolved ourselves from slavery yet. We have not forgiven ourselves. And not only have we not forgiven ourselves, the South is doubling down. They're like, not only are we not sorry, we're going to keep this in place. But that's what the shame does, you know. And it's the shame of being poor, the shame of, I mean, like with Ireland, the shame of the potato famine. We internalize it like we did something wrong, but it's also the shame in the Bible, you know.
Yes. And the Catholic guilt that we've certainly had. And then when we learned about the atrocities by priests perpetrated against children, we have many wounds that we haven't gone near. Our treatment of unmarried mothers, you know, putting them in laundries, many brutal things.
Yes, and it's the root of violence, though, but it comes from childhood trauma, and it comes from, you know, when we traumatize each other, we're traumatizing ourselves. So there is nobody escapes from the cycle.
That's true. And we can like to think it only happens to certain types of people, you know, poor people, or in America, African Americans or Native Americans or immigrants. But the ACEs study, the original one, was mainly white middle-class people with health insurance, private health insurance, and the prevalence was very high, especially for one ACE, but even I think it was 12% had 4 or more, and every subsequent study has borne this out, except that, of course, racism is a form of trauma in and of itself.
Yes, well, we in that circle, so what I did is there are 31 questions in that circle, not the 10.
Okay.
What I did though with the first 5 questions of the ACE test, I broke those out too, because, not only are you, you're threatened to be hit, you've also got bruises. So both of those are traumatic events. I'm not gonna group them in one. So and then I added homelessness, foster care,
Sure.
juvenile justice system, and big one, head trauma.
Right.
So,
okay.
and if you look at them, one day I'm going to release the whole circle so we can all see like what happened with each. Like 90% of those men, I think maybe even 99% had head trauma. So, and that is that actual brain damage, which is
Yes.
which presents just same way as childhood trauma. It's the same damaging. So, and I actually sent a couple. I tried to get a lot some status on death row members, people living on death row. I got 2 responses, and both of them scored a 10 on the ACE test, and then with all my additional questions adds up to 21. They were all every single one, and then their stories. They supplemented it with stories of their child abuse, and just the one that just keeps, I can't get it out of my head. This child came home to his father who had blown his brains out on his bed. So, and the brain matter was on the walls. So this is a man who did an unconscionable crime, and he mutilated the bodies after he killed them. I mean, unconscionable.
Mm-hmm.
And what was done to him was unconscionable.
Yes.
And so, what frame does a body, in a reactive mode and when triggered, like I get triggered and I don't even know where it comes from, but I'm not that person. Yeah. I'm not that crazy, but like when my son starts banging on the table, I react, and I still have this reaction.
It's a shock to your nervous system somehow.
It is. And, and even when people play tricks on me, it can really set me off, and they think I'm just whacked out, and actually I am.
Yeah.
I am whacked out, and there's no shame for it. I mean, and it's this whole shame culture. It's insidious, and it's keeping, the secrecy of trauma in place. Like I was ashamed of my mother for beating me. I was ashamed of my father for being an alcoholic. I was ashamed for my mother's mental illness. So I didn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. I walked around like, yeah, I'm cool. And then, I'm acting out, I'm doing drugs, I'm running the streets of New York City, shoplifting, doing whatever I feel like. But that's just acting out because I didn't feel there's no wholeness. Mm. The wholeness was missing. And, we have all these kids doing the same thing. The thing that separates me from the men that I work with in prison is my father cherished me. Okay. My mother saw some good in me. She thought, yes, Fritzi. One day I came home, I had found a bike on the street, and I said, Mom, I can do anything I want. And she said, yes. So I had reinforcement, even though they were out of their minds, both of them. Mm. They both, in their own moments, saw me as having value.
Yes. And they cherished you at times, at least. When they could
step out of their own neuroses, and there were other teachers, and my mom pulled me out of public school and put me in private school. So I had some people that had some time to give to me, and that made all the difference. And I want to, when I go into prison, I see those men as valuable. Yeah. I see them as having potential, and I see them as being important. I bring this sign to prison.
Yeah.
And
because they may not have ever been told it before, unfortunately.
And when you say it and you mean it, and I do, and every one of them means, and I'll get a new guy in, and it's like, okay, let's open the heart. What is it about this man that I adore? And there's one exercise we do for every man. and woman, when the time comes, we have them stand in the circle, and each person around the circle says 3 things that they see in that person that is positive and meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to stand in the circle too, and I mean, you know, I'd never had that many compliments in my life.
Right.
And,
Okay.
but it was the most empowering, beautiful thing that ever happened to me. And what if we all did that for each other instead of taking each other down 3 notches for what they're wearing, or they're fat, or they're, old. God forbid, we get old. God forbid we show our wisdom on our face, or our hair, whatever the public shaming. Twitter is just a minefield of shame. And why don't we make it a minefield of love?
Yeah.
Not a minefield, like a platform of love and recognition. I mean, that's what's available.
Why not?
Yeah.
And just from watching that clip again, I mean, you bring yourself into it. You tell the men about your story, and also mention that, despite, say, the chaos that you went through in your youth, and maybe getting up to mischief and drug taking, you were privileged because you were a white woman. And the fact that you were a woman, you obviously got some slack cut to you that maybe other people do not get. Now, a lot of women in prison are also white in the States. You have an awful lot of underprivileged people, too many women separated from their kids.
Yes.
But still, I think it's probably, or maybe I'm wrong, but is it fair to say that the American criminal justice system, the penal system, is quite a racist system? A broken system with a penal industrial complex, with private prisons, and there's disproportionate numbers of African Americans and people of color in the system. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And in that circle, I don't know how many, I don't know what the race numbers are in that yard that I was in, but I would say 75% of those men were African American. And, the rest, I mean, maybe 1% was white. And so that really shows me, yes. And the racism but if the racism begins at the beginning of the criminal justice system, boots on the ground in the arrests, and it's that othering that we've been doing since slavery. This is part of our unaddressed racist past, and it's infected all of us. I know my own racial tendencies. I examine them every day, and I go out of my way. Like during COVID, I'd cross the street because I had a mask, because I didn't have a mask on, but it was an African American. Anyway, just I'm trying to be really
reflexive.
Yes, but reflexive. But I didn't want him to think I was crossing because he was African American. I was crossing because of the mask. Now it's more crossing the street is now what we do. But I don't want anyone to think that I'm afraid of them. I mean, sometimes I am afraid of them, but it could be a white person too. Homeless people are a little sporadic. They can trigger me. And so I have to be really, a little aware of what I'm doing. But it's not that I don't love them, because I see myself in them as well. And I mean, that's an opportunity when you see a homeless person, is to love them. Because wow, to get to a place of homelessness, there's got to be so much trauma in that man or that woman. And so it's a chance for us to love our own trauma and, really take care of that place.
It's interesting that you mention homelessness, because since I've learned about trauma and ACEs, it does strike me that, if the family home, the place that you're born into, has been a place of absolute torment and torture, it's no wonder that you seek safety on the streets, even though the streets aren't safe either. But, you know, in terms of understanding the problem or what's underneath it all, you know, I heard someone talking about homeless service users once, and one of the girls who had massive adversity ran away from home first at the age of 4, which is remarkable, you know. But Fritzi, you mentioned there wellness centers instead of prisons. And I like that because, you know, prisons are ugly. What they've done is ugly and harmful. Very little redemption, very little rehabilitation, very little or non-existent healing. But wellness, renaming and reframing has potential. What do you think can be done to improve the situation? Obviously, you're on a mission. You're a woman with the Compassion Prison Project mission. Where do we start?
We start, everyone takes an ACE test. Every single man, woman, and, you know, teenager takes an ACE test. So we all have an understanding of, first of all, that we have the trauma too. Mm-hmm. You know, even if our parents got divorced, that tension in the household, that animosity, that, you know, even if they're just, you know, repressed wasps, you can feel that. And that enters your system. That, you know, no one is immune when parents are hating each other. Mm-hmm. So know your ACE score, absolutely. Know and understand understand what the health implications of an ACE test are, but also what the criminal implications and what choices do you have when you're that traumatized. Second is find out how many prisons are in your country or in your state or in your area. So, and how much are we spending? And why is that money going towards punitive practices when that same money can be immediately turned into trauma-informed care? A trauma-informed prison system, first off, the first question that's asked is, what happened to you? Mm. And even just saying that, that's from the heart. That's not from like who the F are you? Yeah. Like instead of what's wrong with you, what happened? Like, you know, when you arrest somebody, that person's doing something wrong, but it's like, okay, we got it. We're going to apprehend you now, and we're taking you in because you need some help. You need help. You're traumatized. And better that the community steps in, better that we start getting these restorative practices going. And there are some people that need to be taken off the street because the damage is so extreme. I mean, and when you know, they say out of 1 in 1,000 people commit murder. Mm. And that the person that committed murder had the worst childhood of all those other 999 people. So think of that. Think of the kind of just abuse and horror that these children have endured. And then they grow up and there is no hope. They can't learn because they're hypervigilant. They're not sitting in class absorbing X plus Y. They're absorbing, the guy behind me is going to hit me. Or he may not hit him, but he's thinking that, and that's hypervigilance. He's not thinking about, so they have these special ed classes, but, you know, that's not what they need. They need to sit, they need to feel safe.
Yes.
We need to create a safe world so we can all heal. I mean, and that's, you know, and we can, you know, Minnesota just had a police, you know, kill another African-American. And, you know, and I have no shame. I have compassion for the policeman too, because he's traumatized too. I mean, you know, the racist,
otherwise.
Exactly. You know, violence begets violence, and violence attracts violence. You know, how many policemen have been traumatized as children? One of the circles, as we continue filming, we're going to do a circle with women. We're going to do a circle with incarcerated veterans, and then a circle with correctional officers. Wow. So we're going to get to see what levels of child abuse are in all these different circles and these different demographics. And we're going to see a lot of childhood trauma in the vets and in the and in the correctional officers.
Mm.
And my hope is that people see themselves, because, you know, sometimes people can't see themselves in someone who's committed a crime, but they can see themselves in people that are here to serve us.
Yes.
And, or, you know, incarcerated vets, they were there to serve us first. But and they also say that, you know, vets, when they have PTSD, a lot of that is just from childhood trauma.
Yes.
It's not necessarily from the bomb, but it exacerbates it. I mean, one of the vets who's a volunteer at Compassion Prison Project, you know, he said this COVID stuff is really, because it's a threat. It's an unseen threat. So it's triggering all the, you know, all the bells and whistles in the brain. So, but yes, it's our humanity that we need to all connect with.
One of the things that I found very interesting over the last few years, I've done some trauma trainings, and one of them was with Dr. Stephen Porges, who is he's a psychiatrist and neuroscientist that Bessel van der Kolk and many others find really useful for kind of understanding, I suppose, the biology of what happens with trauma. And so it's called polyvagal theory, which kind of sounds very technical, but he has a nice phrase about neuroception being our unconscious detection of threat in the environment. And so if it can be an adult trauma, so if someone is a rape victim, that shakes their sense of safety around other people. You know, if you grew up in an unsafe home, again, you never know what it feels like to return to a baseline of safety. But do you think prisons, given the fact that they have some of our most traumatized men and women in any country in them, can they, one, be safe places in order to do this healing work? They felt safe with you. As I say, watching the video, I actually felt there was a safety in that room for people, and that they liked sharing. You know, there was the one guy, a youngish Hispanic man, who said, I am a traumatized child. I was born into a household with traumatized children, and their parents were traumatized. So there was a lot of sharing that went on, that people seemed to feel free to share these awful secrets from the past. But if traumatized, violent, angry men, let's say, if they can learn that, you know, oh, it wasn't just that I am broken beyond repair, that there was something in me that was inherently bad and evil. I might have done awful things, but this is why, this is a large part of why. Do you think that kind of self-compassion and self-understanding, and kind of saying, yeah, I was actually a victim too. I was, just to show you a tiny foot, this was my daughter's foot when she was 1 week old. But that 70-year-old man in that prison with you was that size once, as were all the other men. And that, so I like the fact that you say children, those children, these children, because that's still in them, isn't it, Fritzi?
Absolutely. I feel like they're puppies, you know, because they want to be seen like a child wants to be seen. Like my son, he's like, Mom, look at this. Come look. I mean, maybe 10 times a day, come look. And it's the same thing. They want to be seen. They're dying to be seen. It's a craving, and it's a craving we all have. It's the biggest, I think it's one of the biggest cravings. And it's why we have, you know, President Trump. He still hasn't, he's got a hungry ghost that won't be fed. He cannot fill that hole, and he wants to be seen. He'll do whatever it takes. And it's the same, and these men will do whatever it takes to be seen. They did whatever it took to be seen. And it even got them into prison. And we need to see them as valuable, and see them, that they matter, that they can change the world, and they can. They have the tools to heal their community like nobody else. I mean, and when you see the next video that's coming out, you're going to hear more stories, and you're going to hear more like unimaginable trauma, but also they're revealing their souls to us. Mm-hmm. They're actually healing us, because they're showing us what it looks like to be vulnerable, to open your heart, to just be there be there. And, and they say in this quantum field thing, it's kind of weird to me, but when we heal now, we heal the past. So, we're healing our ancestors, so I don't even understand how that works, but it feels right to me. So I'm going with it.
Yeah. Yeah, but there is a thing. Bessel van der Kolk as well says, we need to feel what we feel and know what we know. And there's a beautiful film, I don't know if you've seen it, about Daryl Hammond, Cracked Up.
I just saw it. Yeah.
Oh, amazing film, but where, again, Bessel says that, the essence of trauma is not being seen or known. And so I guess your circle is an invitation to be seen and known, with the welcome of I love you and you matter from the get-go. And then to have that repeated once whatever is said is amazing. It's a healing balm in and of itself, I expect.
Yes. And, I had the same need to be seen all my life, constantly, and never, it was my hungry ghost too. And the thing about life is, though, I'm seeing them and they're seeing me, and we're healing each other. Don't ever think I'm not getting anything out of that, because I had 235 men looking at me. Talk about getting seen.
Yeah.
And seeing for what I do well now. I'm feeling that I'm doing this pretty well, and which is bringing compassion first to myself, and that's the algorithm, and so everyone wonders, why do we have this criminal justice system? It's like, because you're being violent to yourself, first off. Mm-hmm. So what you're seeing in the world is a direct reflection of where you're at with yourself. If you want a compassionate world, start being compassionate to yourself. I mean, and it'll shift. The whole thing will shift because you're doing it. It's kind of like this quantum. It's quantum. Our collective consciousness. We're going to heal the past of everything that happened in Ireland. Which, oh God, I did a documentary on James Joyce. You know that.
I didn't know. Fascinating. My husband's a major Joyce fan, right? Yeah.
Oh God, yes, it's called Joyce to the World. So I've been to Ireland 3 times, and to me, the tapestry of elegance and wonder, but also severe pain and agony, and Irish people are real fighters, and
plenty of addictions as well, I mean, as stereotypes with drinking, but that does come from our collective wounds and the need to dull our autonomic arousal somehow.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I would say the child abuse, I don't know. I mean, based kind of on Angela's Ashes, God, how much trauma can a kid endure? Frank McCourt was in the documentary that I did.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the legacy of violence, even in Ireland, I mean, and no shame. I'm not going to shame Ireland. America's top, the English have perpetrated violence all over the globe.
Colonialism, I mean, the colonial wounds, we're victims of colonial wounds as well, and I used to laugh, actually, or kind of be a bit dismissive of the 800 years of oppression kind of saying, but we do carry that with us, whether we know it or not. We carry the fear of our hungry, downtrodden forefathers, and the rational part of our brain dismisses all of that. It's kind of like we barely believe that our attachment relationship to our mother and father was important, let alone going back generations. But Fritzi, in terms of the fear-conditioned brain and trauma as an embodied experience, again, Bessel and people like Gabor Mate and others talking about how the body holds it. Even if we think we've forgotten, even if we think we're over it all, that we're just somehow more resilient or stronger than other people. It can be in our neuroendocrine system, our immune system, whatever. And and also it can impact our ability, I guess, to control our impulses and, you know, make sensible decisions. The thing about offending behavior programs, certainly in Ireland and in many other places, is that they target the cortical brain, the thinking brain.
Right.
And they try and give us insight into our faulty cognitions and this, that, and the other. But they don't really acknowledge our survival instincts and the fact that if I've grown up as a man or a woman in a very violent household and community, I'm going to have a short fuse. I'm oriented towards survival, and sometimes I might just lash out because that's what my body has learned to do. It's not my cortex telling me anything about that. Do you think that trauma survivors in prison would benefit from somatosensory type interventions, whether it's like drumming or dancing or certain types of sensory motor psychotherapy, or things that work with the body and the survival brain?
Absolutely. Like, and yoga and meditation and, you know, anything to calm your body or to, you know, be in your body. You know, and, you know, to also, like, I'm nonviolent communication, learning those tools is like, how am I being violent to myself? And then seeing violence, you know, slowing things down so you have time to think, and so you have time to observe your, you know, what's going on with you, and forgiving. That's like such a big important part. But also just trauma awareness to me, that like I've given all the men I'm working with a gift to say, this is not who you are, people. You've been told you've been a piece of crap since you were born. It's a lie. And that information is crucial. But also trauma-informed correctional officers, trauma-informed prisons. I mean, that's kind of like an oxymoron. And you know, to have a guard understand that if he's going to strip search somebody, that's going to trigger them.
For sure.
And so it's like, okay, why are we doing this? This is exactly what our victims, our incarcerated victims is going to set them off. And then we're going to, you know, it's going to reinforce the myth that they're monsters. And, you know, but the thing about what we've done with corrections, it's a military operation. They are trained to see the incarcerated people as the other. They're not in alignment. There's no heart. You know, you look at a correctional officer and he's armored up, but his heart, it's like a thick wall of, you know, get out of my heart area. And, you know, I try and get in there with them because, you know, it's the Compassion Prison Project. We're doing, you know, we got a meditation program for all the correctional officers in California. That's 35 prisons. That's thousands of men. Sam Harris donated his meditation app. So we know that this is not just compassion is on both sides of the aisle. This is just another way of othering ourselves, you know. And when we other ourselves, you know, it's violent. When I don't see you as my sister or as my soulmate, that's violence. Anything I see in you that's negative is a direct way I feel about myself. And we may not know it, it's just, but it's in there. There's something in there. That's one of the things I have them do. It's called recapitulation, where they go back through their lives, or who are the people that I've harmed? And if you can, like, reach out to those people, and if not, you know, pray to those people, say, I'm sorry, because not only did you harm that person, you harmed yourself. And, you know, most of these men in prison, I'm sorry, and women as well, but I've been working with men lately. You know, they let's say they murdered somebody. They also put themselves in prison for the rest of their lives. And they also deal with this crime every day of their lives. So, I mean, they have a manifested version of the injury of what they've done, but they also have like the psychic guilt is just, you know, what they're holding in these prisons, they're warehousing not only their own shame, they're warehousing our shame.
Yeah.
So they're, we owe a lot to the men and women in prison, because
it's so interesting the way you talk about ourselves, because it is very tempting for people who are doing better, than the folks in prison, to kind of keep them out of sight and out of mind, and they're just not like us, but we allow the conditions in which child abuse and neglect is not seen or prevented or responded to. We don't support struggling families. We have gross inequity. We have racism, and we don't respond with love in schools a lot of the time. But just in relation to prison officers, we had a former Director General here in Ireland, and he used to always say, the prison officers are the number one change agent, actually, because they are the people who spend most of the time with prisoners, more than psychologists, more than art teachers, more than drama therapists, or, whoever else. And if they can be educated about, things like trauma and ACEs, and how these fundamentally can change us in terms of adaptive behaviors that then become maladaptive, but to survive, violence is actually kind of useful.
Yes.
And to reframe that and kind of then see, oh, well, I have a role in helping this man or woman realize, like what you're doing, that's not you actually. That's not fundamentally who you are underneath it all, the essence, the authentic you kind of thing. Or what one guy, Shad Maruna, a criminologist, calls the core good self, but other people might say the authentic self. That is what you're trying to help people find, isn't it, Fritzi, in a way?
Well, and guess what? I'm also trying to help myself find it.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And
yes,
and when we all start realizing that we're all really, our unique individual, we're our own little gift, and I'm never going to be Kim Kardashian, and Kim Kardashian's never going to be me. I mean, that's might be a ridiculous example, but I can't live up to anybody but myself. And in that it's very empowering than looking out and trying to get a message, trying to find out who I am through the lens of somebody else's experience. That's one of the things we use celebrities for, is to learn about our own greatness. So great. So now I am as big as Kim Kardashian, just that I like to go to prisons and, spread my compassion.
Yeah.
But this is my version. We don't want two Kim Kardashians. We want a Fritzi and a Kim, and we want a Jane. That's what we have. And that's the message, is like, let's not shame each other for not being some ideal that doesn't exist. Let's, celebrate each one of us. And, in that we go to a prison. I want to celebrate all those men. I want to celebrate all the correctional officers. I want to celebrate everyone. But all these hierarchies and weird, all these rules in prison that just demoralize the soul. It's like, come on, people. Let me bring them some lunch. That would only let me bring them donuts and snacks. That's all and some water. It's like, come on, let me bring them just a Subway sandwich. Let them taste,
what do you think you were bringing in? Yes, this is the security consciousness that that trumps the fact that, breaking bread or having a little treat would be so nice for people.
Well, I brought donuts and I brought, chips and stuff, but, let's give them a glorious meal. Let's make it glorious. Let's be glorious.
Yeah.
It heals them. It makes them feel like somebody. I mean, when they go on lockdown, the prison I work at, they're in their cells 23 hours a day, unless they have a job or if they have school. So 23 hours a day. Okay. When they're on lockdown, that's 24. They don't get out. And, with the COVID, there's a lot of lockdowns going on. And so the food that they don't get enough calories. So they have to supplement with their canteen. But when they're on lockdown, and the canteen are these soups, these ramen noodle soups. That's their luxury. I mean, but that's the depravity. That's the level of depravity that we've been doling out to these men and women. And we got to stop this. We got to stop depravity, because we're also depriving ourselves. We're depriving our society of the abundance that really is. I mean, we know how abundant we are, and yet we're hoarding. We have Jeff Bezos with billions of dollars. He wants to go to space. Whatever he wants to do, fine, do that, and then let's give back.
Yes.
Let's you have the capacity to change entire cities. You have the capacity to uplift millions and millions of families. That's what your capacity is, Jeff Bezos. So let's do it. Let's live in this culture that with the abundance that actually exists. And all of our congressmen, when we're hoarding and we're trying to manipulate the vote and manipulate, just let people, this is a democracy. Let us all vote and let's decide who we want in the office.
Yeah.
All these things that are, I got to win, which means somebody's got to lose. And
this grasping tendencies. Yeah. While you mentioned Jeff Bezos there, I know you're a charity now. So are you trying to fundraise? Are you trying to get people who have deep pockets to kind of get behind this great vision for a compassionate world, really, not just prisons, but bring it to those who need it most? Fritzi,
it is a compassionate world we're bringing, because when we're compassionate to our most traumatized, because that's what it really is, they're our most traumatized. When we're compassionate to them, it's like a bigger compassion to ourselves. We're like, oh, wait a second, I see you, I see me, I see my humanity in each other. Yes, donations. One of the things my new dream for this year is tablets, like iPads or whatever it is, in the hands of every single incarcerated man and woman, because COVID's going to be going on for over a year. They're not meeting with their family regularly. They're not seeing their family. They're just getting phone calls, and they're not getting programs. So, they're festering, and we got to stop that. So yes, that'll help. I don't know if we need probably $10 million for that. So if anyone's got that, let's do it. And we'd also need a little bit of support from Congress and stuff to uplift these restrictions, because they're worried about gang members, connecting with their gangs. Well, guess what? There's phones in prisons.
Yeah.
Every high level gang member is connecting with their gang. So you haven't solved that problem. So it's going to keep going on,
So you mean that Congress needs to kind of not use that as a blockage for everyone else being able to communicate with the outside world during this pandemic, pretty much?
Yeah, well, they have to realize that if we're going to rehabilitate the men and women living in prison, because if they come out traumatized the way they came in, and actually more traumatized, that's not rehabilitation. That's just that's a parody. That's like a bad play. Like, oh yeah, we're rehabilitating. No, I mean, the word corrections is even wrong, because it's actually abuse. It's a Department of Abuse is basically what it is. Abuse and punishment and, re-traumatization. It's the Department of Re-traumatization. That's what, let's just call it that. So, the Department of,
pardon me, could it become, do you think, following your vision to its logical conclusion, could it possibly, or should it be renamed something like, the Department of Healing and Wellness or something? Is that feasible, do you think?
Yeah, I actually, on my Instagram, I put the seal. I photoshopped the seal, so it says the Department of Wellness and Rehabilitation.
Okay.
But I'll take any of those words.
So long as they're meaningful. Yeah. And one final question, Fritzi, because you've been so generous with your time, but is there any single policy that you would like, your politicians across America, but you know, in California, wherever, Governor Newsom is fairly progressive, and you have Nadine Burke-Harris there as Surgeon General. But what do policymakers need to do or understand or shift if it was only one small thing to begin with?
Okay, well, the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, all this parole baloney. You know, let's get a, you know, 5 people from inside, like the correctional officers and other incarcerated men or women, put them on the board with the parole board, and let's really find out who's suitable. Who do you trust to be in your community? Who is out? Because I actually asked this with Sam, he's like the co-creator of this film. So how many men in your yard today could be out? He says, without services, I would say 50%. And he said, with services, 75%. So that's 75% of that yard. I believe there's 800 men on that yard. I guess, let's say 600 men. So twice that circle, you know, could leave today. Well, that's 50%. Twice that, yeah, 400 men could leave today. And if we had like a container for them, so that's 200 men left. And if all the resources that we're putting towards those 200 men, if those were all trauma informed, and so, yes, you know, decarceration.
And I know I said that was the last one, but what about drugs policy or the war on drugs? Has that, do you think, been effective? Is America winning the war on drugs, for example? You know,
remember, you can never win a war because there's always somebody that loses. So nobody wins. And you know, when people say I'm going to fight for justice, that means there's an enemy. So there's immediately an other, which we have to take the other out of even our language, because it's a violent act, you know. So but as far as Johann Hari, he had an interview.
The Scream, great book.
Yes, I didn't read the book, but I heard this interview, I think it was with Joe Rogan, but he talks about just make drugs legal, just make them all legal, and there will be no war. You know, people get high because they're traumatized. Or I'll have a glass of wine because I've been stressed out of my mind, but we do it. It's medication. We're medicating ourselves. You know, we cannot criminalize people taking care of themselves. I mean, and that's what we're doing. And the minute you take, you know, alcohol was illegal. The minute we legalized it, there was no more, you know, gangsters killing each other. So yeah, let's legalize everything, and then we'll have a different society, because there will be no drug war, because there's nothing to fight over.
There's not all these obscene profits and, you know, carnage at the border and stuff. He has a lovely saying as well that ties so beautifully into your whole compassion prison project, which is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but connection. And that again is what you're trying to bring to the men and women, but also connection to ourselves, to not see them as fundamentally different or other, and heal our collective wounds.
Yes, and a guy named Thomas Hubel, I think Hubel, Hubel, he says the major symptom of trauma is separation. So it's like the inverse of Johann, but it's, you know, it's a fractured sense of self. And when you realize you're traumatized, that awareness is so important, because you realize, wait a second, somewhere deep inside, and we all know this, that's the thing, we all know deep inside we are perfect and we are divine. We know it. And when we can tap into that and allow others to tap into that, you know, why are we doing this? Then we suddenly say, why are we doing this? But, you know, we have to unearth all the detritus and trauma and, you know, self-loathing, so we can get to it. And, you know, that's what I'm offering.
and become sublime, find our sublime, you know, untarnished self
We are
underneath
sublime.
all the, yeah, we are. Well, Fritzi Horstman, it has been a real absolute pleasure and delight talking to you. Your passion for this work is so motivating. I kind of want to get cracking on something similar myself, you know, over here, because it's badly needed, as it is everywhere else where there are prisons, sadly. But thank you so much for talking to me in this Law and Justice special on how to talk policy and influence people about the Compassion Prison Project. I cannot wait to see the next clip, and will be a big fan of your work and learning from it as you keep going. Thank you to your team and to the men who you know showed their souls and shared themselves with you. It was very special.
Wait, let me just show you. Hold on, sorry.
No
I
problem.
just created their award. Oh, wait, let me get it. Sorry, this Zoom thing doesn't like
Yeah,
it.
I sorted. It's like the mirage of Zoom, but I see it's a, yeah, I see it there. Compassion Prison Project. Yeah, Samuel N. Brown. He's your colleague. That's
Yes, but I'm making this for all 235 guys to
lovely.
acknowledge their contribution to our film, and now they're compassion ambassadors. So, you know,
Superb.
yes. So
Superb.
thank you so much, Jane. This was awesome. And let's have another talk down the line.
Yes, please. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Thanks a million, Fritzi, and best of luck going forward.